Benazir, now her son, who continues to prattle on about this 10,000-year war over Kashmir when Pakistan had no entitlement to Kashmir to begin with. With respect to Nawaz Sharif, he's been very reticent to go after the sectarian groups because he doesn't want to alienate them as potential voters. So this is a very sad case where there's no heroes anywhere to be found. The political class as well as the military are all enablers of this pernicious thing that's eating up Pakistan. I want to point it out to Pakistanis. More Pakistanis are dying because of their proxies than are dying in India. The only people that they're more likely to kill in larger numbers is Afghans. So this is a Pakistani problem that Pakistan needs to deal with. I want to turn, I think I understood the fellow's question about Balochistan, and this is an incredibly important question. I'm so happy that you raised it. I have a lot of data that looks at the changing views in Balochistan as a consequence of the state specifically supporting Islamist militant groups in Balochistan. Lashkar-e-Taiba, under the name of Jamaat al-Dawa and its philanthropic but similarly prescribed name FIF, they have been singularly allowed to do all of the humanitarian work in Balochistan to promote this message of Sunni extremism that the army likes to promote. They've also supported Lashkar-e-Jumbi to do the dirty work, and obviously JUI, and the consequences of that are important. Turning to the numbers, yes, we need numbers. It's not enough to just wave our hand and say, well, it looks pretty dodgy. Numbers are the only way we can look at things scientifically and try to understand what explains the trends that we observe. So if we're not going to do this scientifically, I should just go back to my PhD where I looked at, the Punjabi historical fiction. But I think I also heard you ask about other countries in the region. You asked about Bangladesh. Well, unfortunately, many of the things that we are seeing in Bangladesh is a stem. It has its historical roots in its creation and its original ties with Pakistan. Pakistan has been incredibly active in supporting Islamist militant groups in Bangladesh. I've spent a lot of time in Bangladesh. Huji, all of these groups there, Deobandi, they've long enjoyed Pakistani support. Pakistan has sent Lashkar-e-Taiba to Bangladesh. FIF is operating in Bangladesh. So many of the things that Bangladesh is experiencing is an admixture of things that are of a historical trajectory in its own, trying to figure out what does the two-nation theory, if anything, still mean for it? Does Bangladeshi mean being Muslim first or Bangladeshi first? Coupled with these activities in Pakistan. Sri Lanka, I heard you mention. Yes, Sri Lanka had an insurgency for many years, but what you're really missing is that at no point in time did the Sri Lankan government give support to the Tamil Tigers. The Indians did, very briefly, and they paid a big price for it. They lost a prime minister over it. So Pakistan is unlike other countries in the region because it is the creator of these terrorist groups, and it is the country which is most responsible for the spread of Islamist terrorism throughout the region. And obviously, Afghanistan has been one of the biggest victims of this pernicious disease. So I think Pakistan, even if you look in the region, is incredibly distinct. But yes, we need these numbers. We need these numbers terribly.
I'm sorry, we can't continue this anymore. We'll obviously go on for another 2 hours on this. But perhaps if you're available, we could come back to the general discussion and ask some of these questions at 6:30 in the last half hour. But thank you very much, Christina, for the moment. I'm sorry we have to move on. I mean, not sorry we have to move on, but we have other speakers and we must give them time. Thank you very much indeed. Can I give... Right. Right. Do you want to stay, Christina, with the discussion?
Yeah. Yeah, that would be great, yeah.
Our next speaker is Mr. Irfan Hussain, who's a journalist and author who currently writes weekly columns for Dawn. He's been writing on a wide range of subjects for newspapers in Pakistan and elsewhere since 1970. He was had a 30-year career in the Pakistan Civil Service, during which he was an information minister in the Pakistan Embassy in Washington, a speechwriter in the Prime Minister's Secretariat, and many other government posts. He's written extensively on national, regional, and international affairs over the years. He is going to talk on the topic. Your title is Pakistan, Both Victim and Source of Terrorism. No question mark. Irfan.
Well, I'd like to thank Dr. Christina Fair. She's certainly given us a lot to think about, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. But I won't take up what she said in her paper, because I'm sure many in the audience probably will have other questions. Now, before I talk about the existentialist threat that terrorism poses to Pakistan and go into what my perceptions are and why it's happening, I wish there was a map of Pakistan to show you that why our military planners have used terrorism as a tool over the past several decades. If you look at the middle of Pakistan, you'll see that Pakistan's main arteries, transport arteries, the rail system, the roads, pass very close to the Indian border. And it's the Pakistan military's worst nightmare that India can cut this in a very quick armored thrust. So for many years, before 9/11 especially, Pakistan had a doctrine of strategic defense in which they thought that they could pull back into Afghanistan and continue the fight from there. After 9/11, this changed, and now Pakistan relies more and more on battlefield nuclear weapons to neutralize the threat of an Indian attack across the border. Now, this has its own problems, which I'll come back to in a little while. But at the same time, there's been a growing nexus, as viewed from the army headquarters, between Kabul and New Delhi. Just a couple of days ago, Prime Minister Modi has promised an aid package of $1 billion to Kabul. And now, obviously, Pakistan can't match this kind of money or buy this kind of influence. So what it's afraid of is that there will be a formal alliance between Afghanistan and India, and Pakistan will be encircled. Now, many years ago, I asked a Pakistani general how he could justify the use of Islamic militants in Kashmir. And his reply was quite revealing. He said, we send over a few hundred militants, and that ties down several Indian Army divisions. So it's a win-win situation for us. Except, of course, it wasn't. It was a lose-lose situation because, as Dr. Fair mentioned, there's been massive blowback in Pakistan. Because when General Musharraf, under pressure from the Americans, tried to rein these people in, they turned their guns on the Pakistani state and targeted both soft civilian targets and as well as military and security agencies. So there's been about 60,000 dead so far in different kinds of militancy and different kinds of terrorism. Dr. Fair has detailed the different varieties of violence that has been wracking Pakistan for decades now. And the whole concept, I think, started way back in 1948 when, during the brief war in Kashmir, Pakistani tribesmen went into Kashmir and seized a large amount of territory before they stopped just short of Srinagar, and then the Indian government flew in troops. So, and which is where now the line of control falls. But that was the first use of irregulars which provided deniability to the state. The second time this happened was in 1971 during the terrible civil war in what was then East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, when militants from the Jamaat-e-Islami were served as a sort of irregular arm to the Pakistan army and were guilty of many atrocities there. Then when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan in the late 70s, and the Americans and the Saudis joined this fight, and militants were used against the Soviet forces with American money and arms, and Muslim militants were flown in from around the world to the tribal areas of Pakistan and used to varying effects against the Soviets. And these people then couldn't go back to their countries, and they settled in the tribal areas where they married, raised families, and so on. So when the Soviets pulled back, Pakistan was left with about 3 million Afghan refugees and thousands of these fighters who had set up home there. Around the same time as the Soviets pulled back, there was an indigenous uprising in Kashmir. And the army tried to, or the defense establishment tried to take over this movement by infiltrating jihadi elements there. And there was, as you all know, there was a lot of fighting, a lot of bloodshed. So the army thought that if militant groups, motivated and trained, could defeat one of the strongest armies in the world, then this would surely be a good tool to have as an arsenal. But as we've seen, there has been massive consequences of this policy. So, and again, as Dr. Fair mentioned, there is a lot of support, not overt perhaps, but in TV chat shows, in classrooms, there is support for these, if not the violence these people unleash, at least for the kind of mindset they represent. And this has been absolutely poisonous for Pakistan. And so far, we've had a situation where, despite this terrible killing and violence, governments, both military and civilian, have been dragging their feet in tackling this problem. Right-wing leaders like Nawaz Sharif and Imran Khan have been urging talks which went nowhere. This has delayed armed response. But finally, when the Pakistani Taliban overreached themselves and attacked an army school in Peshawar in December 2014 and killed 130 students, children really, and this galvanized the army and knocked heads together, insisted that the Prime Minister call in all political parties, and there was a unanimous agreement on something called the National Action Plan, which had about 18 or 19 provisions, including obviously armed response to the terrorists, and also to change the curricula in schools, control the madrasas, at least register them, and change their teaching to more modern subjects and so forth, and to stop hate speech on the media as well in mosques and so on, a number of things. But while the army has launched its Operation Zarb-e-Azb in the tribal areas and gone to previously no-go zones, the civil, provincial and federal governments have been dragging their feet. And this, to most rational people, would seem incomprehensible. Until you see that, as Dr. Fair again pointed out, that a lot of the support is in Punjab, where Imran Khan and Nawaz Sharif are locked in political battle because Punjab represents about 60% of Pakistan's population. So if somebody wins big in Punjab, they can effectively win the election. The last time Nawaz Sharif won it, and now Imran Khan is jockeying for position. So both of these politicians are right of center, and they don't want to alienate the support base that also holds up this Taliban mindset. So we've got a number of factors, political, social certainly, and then you've got a situation where Pakistan has probably one of the lowest conviction rates in the world. Only about 10% of accused killers are actually convicted. Often witnesses are frightened off, they don't want to come to court and identify themselves. Judges receive death threats, and of course the whole criminal investigation system is antiquated. The laws are relics of the British Raj and so on. So there's no political will so far to actually change any of this and move forward. There's very little consensus as well. So these are the political dimensions. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there is a military dimension to it. The military sees the possible use of militants as a tool to counter India's preponderance. I mean, India is 5 times the size, it's a much bigger army, obviously, and so forth. So as long as these two things happen, the army is convinced that India presents an existential threat to Pakistan, and the politicians want to use the right-wing clerics, political parties to shore up support for themselves, I fear nothing very much is going to change. And yet, the fact is that the world is not going to stand for for an indefinite continuation of this kind of policy. And I've opposed this in my columns over the years. I've written against using any kind of Islamic proxies to further our political agenda. But you have to understand where these people are coming from, why they take decisions, because they are not irrational actors. There are some very smart people there, and who their perception of the national interest is not mine, perhaps, but nevertheless, it is accepted widely in Pakistan. And perhaps I'm going a bit further than the paper calls for, but I think there has to be some kind of settlement between India and Pakistan, so there's more space for more liberal, more rational attitudes to develop. Currently, because there is this fear, and the army can always use this threat. There have been, as you know, several wars between the two countries. I won't go into who started and why they happened, but nevertheless, there is this attitude in Pakistan that India represents a threat, and to counter this threat, they require unconventional means. And as I said, I wish somehow there could be some settlement to this, but I frankly don't see it happening in my lifetime, at least, because there was a period of optimism at one time, but none of these efforts have come to anything. And from the sounds coming out of New Delhi currently, from the from this government, I fear nothing's going to change very much. So I think I'll stop it there, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Irfan. I will, if I may, go straight on to Bob Blackman, and then we'll have another short question and answer leading into the coffee break. But I think we'll make the best use of the time, the short time available that way. I do really appreciate your questioning in all ways this use of the word terrorism. I mean, there are terrorists, there are acts of terrorism committed by, as you say, quite rational people. And this is a paradox that we have to try and come to terms with. Bob Blackman, sorry you were able to slip in. I'm sorry before we started the proceedings. Bob Blackman is Conservative MP for Harrow East, has been since 2010. Many Pakistanis and Indians, I think, in your constituency.
Many Indians.
Many Indians.
Not huge numbers of Pakistanis, I have to say.
He was previously a member of the London Assembly, and it's perhaps relevant also to say that you've been a consistent Brexiteer.
Correct.
And I think I heard you in a meeting just before the referendum arguing that Brexit would be good for India.
Yes, absolutely correct.
Right. So we know where you stand. But on this question, you're going to talk about Pakistan-sponsored terrorism in Kashmir and the dangers of the China-Pakistan economic corridor for the Indian subcontinent.
Okay, yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. You're absolutely right. I am a very strong...
Is that live?
Is this live? Is this working? Yeah, is it? A strong supporter of Britain regaining its freedom and negotiating trade relationships all over the world, and particularly with our great partners in the Commonwealth, with India and beyond. But that's not the subject that you asked me to speak about. I have had the opportunity of visiting Jammu and Kashmir and also the Punjab this year, and seeing at first hand the longest line of control anywhere in the world between Pakistan and India in the illegally occupied Pakistani quarter of Kashmir. And the reality is that what we've had, and I listened with great interest to what Christina said and our previous speaker, what we've had over the years has been a position whereby Pakistan or Pakistani concentrated efforts have infiltrated into the single state of Jammu and Kashmir on both sides of the line of control. It is, as I say, the longest line of control anywhere in the world, and indeed has the largest border force anywhere in the world in India to attempt to police. The reality is that under United Nations resolutions, the official position of the Indian government and beyond, the stated position, and quite clearly, is that the whole of Jammu and Kashmir is part of India and an integral part of India, and that's where we should be starting from. So the illegal occupation of any part of Kashmir by Pakistan should cease, and therefore the whole of the state retained within India, and then security can be maintained. The current position is, of course, that there is frequent, well-documented evidence of infiltration across the line of control into Kashmir and beyond, which creates the undercurrent of both of terrorists, and this is quite, and when we talk about rational people, these are deliberately rational people. These are not hotheads. These are people that see a political and religious purpose towards cleansing, ethnically cleansing the Kashmir Valley of anyone who is not a Muslim. And we should understand that that is precisely what has been intended from the word go. There have been the frequent attacks, state-sponsored attacks on India more broadly, both in the Punjab and beyond, and at each case they can be traced back to emanating from Pakistan. Now, whether that is supported by the Pakistani military, by the Pakistani government, what we do know is it stems from Pakistan, and Pakistan is therefore a state which is causing these problems to India and to other parts of the world. Now, the reality is that we then have another danger that is encircling India, and that is the China-Pakistani economic corridor. Now, if you look at the map, and we could look at a map and that would see, what is happening is that China is building that economic link through Pakistan and encircling India. At the south of India, on Sri Lanka, China has developed an international airport and an international deep sea port. Their whole basis, both in the South China Sea and to the tip of India, is to control both the sea lanes of the world and the airways of the world. Their aim in China is quite clear, is the long-term encirclement of India, and you can see this going on in Africa as well. And the risk of that is that we have the risk to the largest democracy in the world, in India, being encircled by one of the most totalitarian states on the planet. I think that is a direct threat to democracy, is a direct threat to religious and fundamental freedoms. And I think that's a huge risk that we are undertaking. Now, quite clearly, the security of the region is such that we need to be sending messages both loud and clear that this whole attempt to encircle India is completely unacceptable. That certainly from I'm one of those that speak up very loudly to say Britain should be sending a strong signal to both China and to Pakistan that what is going on is unacceptable, and that we should be building our security and friendship with India on a strong military, security and democratic basis. And indeed that what we should be doing is making clear that what is happening is unacceptable, and equally signing up what I would call a greater security element across the world, with a security arrangement which would exist between the United States, the UK, Israel and India and Australia, so that we would then encircle the globe with a group of countries that value freedom and democracy above all else, and will cooperate on a security basis to protect one another from individual attacks. The reality is that where we sit in Europe at the moment, NATO has made us safe from attack from the east since the Second World War. But in the Far East, there is a real risk, I believe, to democracy and the freedoms that we would all associate. You can see that happening on a day-to-day basis. You can see the threat coming. I think, and this is my personal thoughts, this has suited Pakistan to have a position of the illegally occupied part of Kashmir as a buffer zone and to keep India busy while it continues its progress in this way. To me, that's unacceptable, and we should send the strong signals that actually we will not stand for that. Mr. Chairman, I'll stop there and take, if there are any contributions or questions or counter views, I'm very happy to argue them and point out the historical basis of what I've been talking about.
Yes, well, thank you very much. Just a minute. Thank you very much. You certainly presented a very uncompromising presentation of the situation on Kashmir. It seems to take us back quite a long time in this discussion, the nuances that have taken place over it over the last 50 years. And I'm sure there will be plenty of disagreement to it. But if you could, happy to take questions now, short question answer session for either.
Can you have the mic, please? Can you speak in the mic?
Oh. Is this not on? It's on, yes. Can you hear me? Yes. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. For questions either for Mr. Blackman or for Irfan Hussain. Yes, sir, you.
Yes, I'm Kashmiri. I'm from Srinagar. My name is Professor Mahmood. I live in London. What I have to say, that whole of Jammu and Kashmir state belongs to India. No doubt the exit document was for the whole state. But how India has violated the conditions of the exit document, that nobody speaks about. Second, you have said that the moment in Kashmir is sponsored by Pakistan through terrorism, as India calls it cross-border terrorism. I think if any of us goes to page of history of Kashmir, our movement has started in 1931, our right to self-determination, and we have been continuing for this struggle up till now. Nobody listens to us. I tell you how you meddle with the words. Up till now, America said, India and
Could you ask a question of Mr. Blackman? I mean, we would love to have your speeches, but we don't have time for speeches. I'm sorry.
I want to know, there is a resolution of United Nations, and that accession document has been accepted by Lord Mountbatten, who was the Governor General, on one condition, that is accession is subject to the ratification of people of Jammu and Kashmir who have received a referendum. I want to know from you, what has happened to that promise? What does Pakistan and India doing? They are playing their own game. They have their own issues to sort out. If they want to destroy each other, let them do it somewhere else in Rajasthan, in Punjab or somewhere. You Kashmir is alone. We had our own country, older than Pakistan and India combined. We have 5,000 history according, and nobody knows about that.
So the question is, what happened to the resolution? Do you want to?
Yeah, I'll respond to that, and that is, of course, it's very, very easy for those proponents of wanting to see some form of plebiscite to go through a process of ethnically cleansing the valley, forcing millions of people or thousands of people out of the valley, and then saying the ones that remain behind get the chance to vote. The reality is that Kashmir Pandits have been forced out of the valley almost at gunpoint by terrorists. And I defend their rights to live as they have done for thousands of years in the Kashmir Valley. Remember, sir, the reality is that the Hindu population of the Kashmir Valley was there for thousands of years before the current population.
No, sir, please, can you discuss with Mr. Blackman afterwards? Can we take two more questions? One here, please. Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you. First of all, a great deal of the terrorism we have been talking about is targeting the West. So very little reference to that. My question is that to what extent is this a legacy of past colonial partition and more recent Western military intervention in those areas, including the Middle East. And what we see now is that Pakistan has been turned into a hotbed or proxy ground for all these forces which have since been unleashed. Now, the second one is responsible.
Please, can we have one question? We'll take others later. Yes, sir. You were asking a question here.
Yeah, I think. Yeah. Thank you very much, Chair. And a question is to the MP Bob Blackman is that you're considering the situation in Kashmir is quite sort of humanitarian crisis, if you were to put it mildly, at this point of time, 66 days stuff and everything. And I'm sort of it's my heartfelt, I would say, condolences to many Burmans who have given their lives there and moved away. But that does not take away from the fact that Kashmir had a very overwhelmingly Muslim population. So you refer to a certain aspect of the whole scenario very selectively, because you have to also question when there is an overwhelming opportunity for Muslims or the Kashmiris to vote anyway, whether they want to join Kashmir, India, whether they want to join Pakistan, that's fine. But that right of exercising their vote has to be given. And India, putting it Kashmir as the most highly militarized spot in the world at this point of time. And we are talking about what's happened in Pakistan, what's happening in Afghanistan, and any other place. You can't compare that. So probably I think your analysis, I would like to hear a little bit more about that when you see there's a majority, and my heartfelt condolences to all friends, Burman friends who have left Kashmir due to very unfavorable circumstances, but the majority has suffered. So what is your view on that? I would like.
I think that's a perfectly legitimate point. I think one of the first things I would say is the first duty of a country is to protect its external borders. The second duty of a country is to protect the rights of the minorities that live within that country. Now, the reality is that what's happened in India, there are more Muslims that live in India than there live in Pakistan. So the reality is, India is a secular country, whereas Pakistan is a Muslim country, an Islamic country. So the reality is.
Thank you. Can I put
so the reality is this. The point is that you're absolutely right. If the rights of the minority populations in Jammu and Kashmir could be absolutely safeguarded, then there would be a case to say, okay, well, if the majority of the whole of Jammu and Kashmir, so it's not just Kashmir, the whole of Jammu and Kashmir, including everyone that's left, if the majority then said, and the minority rights could be protected, then a case could be put. But frankly, I do not trust a position whereby the minority rights of Jammu and Kashmir residents and people would be protected in any other state other than India.
Irfan, could I ask you to deal with the question of Western intervention making terrorism worse or causing it?
The current violence in Pakistan, in fact for the last 20 years or so, is not a relic of anti-colonialism, because I think the younger generation has no memory of it at all. It's a lot to do with the perceptions about the American policies, for instance, in Iraq, Afghanistan, Palestine is another issue. So, and violence is directed, there has been violence against embassies, for instance, but not so much against Western businesses in Pakistan. For instance, you've got McDonald's, you've got KFCs, you've got Esso petrol pumps all over the country, but nobody attacks these places. So I think the colonial aspect of any violence is, just a legacy of the past. It doesn't really happen anymore.
Okay, take two more questions, and then we will break for coffee, and you will have an opportunity to talk to Mr. Blackman or Mr. Hussain or anyone. Yes, sir.
My first question is from Mr. Irfan Hussain. Wonderful enlightened presentation.
Can you keep it to one question, please, because we've got so many.
The spread of a wholesale radicalization in Sindh and Balochistan, exponential rise and of madrasas and all that, how that is affecting the national struggle of the marginalized Sindhi and Baloch people. Second question from Mr. Bob Blackman. Sindhi and Baloch people believe that the CPAC will further marginalize the Sindhi and Baloch nation. How do you view that? We are already severely marginalized. What is your view on that? Thank you.
Just one more question. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Democracy Forum and the Forum. My question to all the speakers, including the lady who was there. An intellectual kind of, the research is not complete without seeing the two sides of the coin. My question to all the speakers, do they find that there are any external elements involved into it since creation of India and Pakistan, and what are the reasons, what they find it? And second thing is, very honorable and requested, you are proud Brexiters, and now you are trying to have a dream of USA, UK, Israel. Sir, how could we believe and trust you where the nation has been divided and Brexiters have left and vanished, leaving the nations isolated in the world?
Right, thank you for those. Irfan, would you like to answer the question put you here?
Sorry, do you mind repeating the question? I just got sidetracked.
Well, you want to know what well, I'll give you Boris Johnson, Foreign Secretary. Funnily enough, he hasn't exited anywhere. But he's leading. David Davis, who is leading our campaign to depart the political EU, and of course Liam Fox, who is in charge of international trade and setting up trade relationships across the world. And I predict, sir, as we've already seen, our economy is improving every single day as a result of the decision taken to leave the undemocratic EU. And what we will see in Britain is a far better and outward-looking Britain on the world stage as a direct result.
Yes, Irfan.
Yes, your question was about external influence?
Actually, I have a name.
Yes, Dr. Christina Fair, I beg your pardon, of course. My question is that any academic research is not complete without seeing the two sides of the coin. And I wanted to put that question to all the speakers, that please tell us, are there any external opportunities into that situation of that Southeast Asian social, political and geographical area now, which after Afghanistan, after Middle East, after Libya, after Iran, now we are finding these hypothetically research to find out and open more wounds to the world and humanity.
Now, I must confess, sorry.
Sounds like a general question.
I have done no personal empirical research into this at all. However, where there are troubled waters, there are often people and opponents who do try and fish in these troubled waters. So you had a situation where Pakistan has been interfering in Indian Kashmir, and you probably have a situation where India is exploiting the trouble in Balochistan. And this tit for tat goes on across the world between states, and we shouldn't be too surprised at that. However, I leave any statistics to Dr. Fair. If she's got some, I have no idea.
I think we'll come back to Dr. Fair when we have the general discussion, if you don't mind, Christine.
Well, it's actually...
Because we have very little time.
No, it's late here, and I'm sick.
Okay. Well, would you like to answer that then? But please quickly, because we have to break.
Yeah, very good. So there is external, there are external actors, and the first external actor is, of course, Pakistan, which is exporting terrorism to India and Bangladesh. It's also set up in Sri Lanka. But I really wanted to very briefly take up this issue of the plebiscite that came up. No one pointed out the reality that the UN Security Council resolution 47 of 1948 had three steps, and the first step was that Pakistan had to completely demilitarize.
Absolutely.
And then, once it did so, India had to demilitarize except for a defensive force that it was allowed to retain to protect itself against Pakistani predations. And then, once both of those things were sequentially achieved, then there was to be a plebiscite. So all of those people howling about the plebiscite have one actor to blame, and that's Pakistan, because it failed to demilitarize as that UN Security Council resolution demanded.
Thank you very much. And we'll now break for a short coffee break, 10 minutes if we may, come back, and we have two more very experienced and interesting speakers.
Well, I think Pakistan is both. Victims, certainly. We've lost 60,000 dead security forces and innocent civilians since 9/11. So obviously the victim, but certainly there are elements in the state that have used terrorism as a tool to further the agenda in Afghanistan, in Kashmir. So yeah, I think the answer is both.
And as a journalist, as an ordinary citizen, what would you suggest as the solution to this problem?
Well, I am against using religious terrorism for political ends anywhere. So I have written against it consistently for many, many years, and I certainly oppose this particular policy of the government.
Well, I start from the principle that the whole of Jammu and Kashmir is part of India. That means that Pakistan should leave the illegally occupied part of Kashmir that they've been in since 1947. So that the whole of the state of Jammu and Kashmir can be reunited as part of India, as was already intended by the Maharaja, so that we can get to a position whereby India can secure its borders and secure the position on a security basis within those borders, help and assist the whole of the citizens of Jammu and Kashmir to live in peace and harmony, restore the security that's desperately required. We clearly have a problem that Pakistan is responsible for state-sponsored terrorism coming across the line of control into Kashmir, into the Kashmir Valley, and beyond into other parts of India. This can no longer be tolerated. So we've got to speak out, we've got to be clear on this position and make sure that not only the position of the Indian government is maintained, but also the UK government makes clear that what is going on with the economic corridor, which is being put in between China and Pakistan and encircling India, the biggest democracy in the world, is completely and utterly unacceptable. China is also obviously taking action in the China Sea to try and further its territorial might, and in Sri Lanka. At the tip of Sri Lanka we have the position of the deep sea port and the international airport. Clearly China is trying to take over the sea lanes and the air lanes of the world. So we've got to actually stand up to this and make sure we stand together with India, our traditional friend in the Far East, as part of a network of security across the world.
Bob, some Pakistanis had nerves to bring in the words like referendum when they have looted, raped and kicked out the Pandits of Kashmir. Your comments, please.
Indeed, it is absolute nonsense that we get to a position whereby people forcefully expel Kashmir Pandits from the Kashmir Valley and then say, now we want a plebiscite on our future. The reality is that the terrorism that's been inflicted on people, forcing people to leave their ancestral homes of thousands of years, is absolutely unacceptable. We want a position whereby the Kashmiri Pandits, if they feel able to feel secure, can return